Good evening and welcome to another News News and Views. I'm your host, Don Burgess, and our special guest tonight is Minister of Labor, Jason Hayward. Welcome, sir.
Good evening, Don, and good evening to your listening audience.
Okay. And tonight we're going to talk about a subject that is near and dear, and normally I'd say heart, but tonight I'm going to say wallet, people's wallets. We're going to be talking about the Consumer Price Index and inflation. And for a starting point, Minister, what is the Consumer Price Index?
So, the Consumer Price Index is a statistical tool that measures consumer goods and services that are purchased by households. We commonly refer to the goods and service that we monitor the prices on as a basket of goods.
Okay. And how is that measured?
And so, we derive our inflation rate from the basket of goods. And so, how it is derived is that we run household expenditure surveys. That is done every decade, but we um, have received methodology advice that we want to move to doing that every 5 years. But what we will do is we will do a survey which measures household expenditure of various households across our entire economy. From that particular observation or survey, you would then develop a list of goods and services that are typically purchased by households. Those goods and services, are then weighted into 9 sectors. And so you have a food sector, a rent sector, clothing and footwear sector, tobacco and liquor, fuel and power, household goods, services and supplies, transportation and vehicles, education, recreation, and entertainment and reading, and health and personal care. So what we use is United Nations Consumer Price Index methodology as to how we calculate um, our rate of inflation. We actually use what is considered to be a less porous approach, and that is actually a weighted price index. And so on a month-to-month basis, what we'll do is we'll track the prices of over 3,000 consumer goods and services. Those 3,000 goods and services are then placed in those sectors. Those sectors have weights. The sectors with the heaviest weights influence the consumer price index or the inflation rate the most.
Which is an interesting point because I've seen a few people get upset or be concerned that the rent sector makes up 27% of the CPI, and they think that might be too high in comparison to some of the other sectors.
So we have to understand that that is average expenditure. You have some households where rent is much more than the 26.7% that is in the index now, and you have some households where it's less. And so, because it's a um, measure that measures all households in the economy, what we want to do is have an average rate. And so, I think that it is accurate that our rents take up 26.7% of household expenditure.
Right. So you feel like that's the right number, that it shouldn't be more or less?
But that is accurate according to the last survey. And so it's not like we're making up these numbers. The survey dictates how the weights are derived.
Okay. So many people have been feeling the pinch due to higher food prices. We know, like, they've been soaring all across the world for a variety of reasons: the Ukraine war, COVID, and still supply chain issues. But they don't feel like that's being accurately reflected enough in the CPI. What would you say to them?
I think if they look at any CPI publication, you will see that on a monthly basis, we actually publish food prices. The food price increases as well. You will see that we've been in double-digit increases in food prices for some time now. Just if I look at the February release, which would have been our last release, we had the food sector, things such as lamb, the leg of lamb increasing by 13%, green beans 10%, um, and other food items that increased by that much. And so if you delve down into the index, you will see that those um, price increases are accurately reflected in our consumer price index. The problem is because a leg of lamb doesn't carry the same weight as a car, you're not going to see that level of price movement on the overall rate of inflation.
Right. Do you have any figures there showing how much like a typical bag of groceries or cart of groceries or grocery trip has increased?
No, but that will be generally the measure of the food sector. Obviously, that will be based off of different household compositions, and we can do that study in terms of breaking it down, what is required from various household sizes, and determine the cost of those goods and services that are actually purchased by those households. But the because it's an economy wide measure, we don't do specific household increases.
Okay. In particular, because food's a need for everybody, what can the government do to help ease the public's burden when going to the grocery store?
We have to look at a taxation system, the way in which we have input taxes, and how that influences the increase in prices. We have to look at how the wholesalers and retailers are applying markups to items. Um, but this issue is not an issue that is going to be anytime soon. What we've tried to do as a government is decrease some of the pressure on households by um, providing relief through payroll tax, and you will see that we've rolled back payroll tax over a number of years, and that is directly aimed to provide households with a greater level of purchasing power. But we're not going to be able to provide households with a greater level of purchasing power unless we impact those items that they spend the most money on. If we see rent prices falling, that is better for households within our community. Um, you'd be surprised that the other heavier weighted items in the index are also things like foreign travel. Foreign travel is going up a lot in the index, and the volume of foreign travel that Bermudians actually take is impacting the purchasing power as well. And so there's a number of items impacting purchasing power. We want to ensure that we put some type of wage rate in place so that there's a statutory um, wage floor so that persons are making decent wage. But that is a lot of the work that is done in terms of providing persons with cost of living increases, providing seniors with pension increases, um, looking at how we provide financial assistance and subsidize incomes. That's what we have to continue to do. We'd have to always have a mechanism where we're providing some level of social protection in the economy.
Now, you mentioned minimum wage. I believe there's supposed to be a second report done by the Living Wage Commission or Minimum Wage Commission that's due either this month or next month. When can we see some action on that actually getting implemented?
We haven't quite received the report from the Wage Commission as of yet, but we will be progressing with some type of statutory minimum wage rate. We're doing the work now. Hopefully, I'll get something to um, my cabinet colleagues soon, and then what I'll do is I'll engage in rounds of consultation. But the debate whether or not we need a statutory minimum um, wage in Bermuda, I think that debate has already been had, and we'll be progressing with some type of statutory minimum rate.
And so are we talking 6 months, a year, 2 years? What's the
Certainly,
time frame?
we will certainly have the figure derived and begin the consultation well within the next 6 months.
Okay, and then implementation of it?
But you always have to give time for implementation because employers have to make the necessary adjustments. So a 6-month period after legislation passes is what we'll probably be comfortable with.
Okay, so we're looking probably, if you said 6 months and 6 months plus discussion period in between the two, we're looking 18 months to 2 years possibly then.
No, certainly not. I don't.
No,
I
less.
wouldn't agree with that mathematics.
Okay, so definitely less than 2 years.
Correct.
Okay, that'll be a relief to especially those people at the low end of the pay scale.
Yeah, and it's important that we progress these matters. It's important that things such as unemployment insurance um, is adequately considered. It's important that we continue with social protections and the social assistance we provide to households, because if we don't do that, what we're going to see is as people's purchasing power um, begins to get eroded, the quality of life also begins to diminish, and that's not what we want to see from our population.
All right. Now, that's coming down the road, but
Hmm.
what's something that government can do in the here and now to help people out? I know you guys have, you held the prices on fuel, which has been a blessing for people who use automobiles. Um, but what else can be done?
And so we have to take into consideration what was done during the budget period to provide that level of relief that I spoke about. And so we did make adjustments to payroll tax. We did slightly reduce vehicle license fees, but those are the type of measures, things that are within government's control, that we have to consider how we remove some of that pressure on consumers. But the real work would have to be done through the wage commission, which will not the wage commission, but the cost of living commission that was put together. That was tasked with looking at this particular issue and providing recommendations. The other thing that has to happen is we have to have a realistic look at our system of taxation and ensure that those persons who can pay more are paying more, while those who cannot afford to pay more, we ease some of the pressure on the lower income earners.
Okay, we're going to take some questions from our viewers. Honorable Minister, this is from Sean Whiting.
Mhm.
Kindly explain your 2.5% rate of inflation year over year.
Okay, so if you look at the consumer price index, and the February rate of inflation was actually 2.5%. That followed on from a January rate of inflation of 2.5%. And then we had in December of last year a 2.7% index. When we look across the sectors, we have nine sectors. The health and personal care sector, that increased 3.3%. The education, recreation, and reading sector increased 3.2%. Household goods, services, and supplies increased 9.4%. No, that was transport and foreign travel increased 9.4%. Household goods, services, and supplies 1.5%. Fuel was 0.3%. Tobacco and liquor went up 1.3%. Clothing and footwear went up 0.7%. Rent actually fell by 0.6%. Food increased by 5%. And so when you look at the movement of the individual sectors, and then you look at the weights associated with those sectors, the largest weight is applied to the rent sector, which actually fell, which means that the price increases in the other sector will be pegged backwards, pegged on by your rent sector. The second largest sector within the consumer price index is the education, recreation, and reading sector, and that is worth 14.7% of the index, and that increased by the 3.2%. And so, unless you have large movements in the larger areas of your consumer price index, you're not going to get an overall inflation rate that is high. And so, unless we have increases in rents will continue to peg down the overall rate of inflation.
Okay, next question. Steve McGinnis, the CPI report only shows the top three movements in food sector. Has there been thought to show a report on a monthly basis on the staple items and the month-to-month movement?
And that's something we can certainly do. We can certainly expand on the items that we report price movement on. So yes, but what we do is just look at the largest influencers in the basket.
All right, thank you. Next question, please. Okay, we'll do another one. Talent TJ Clark says the data is not current. If it was, the inflation would be considerably higher.
And so I explained the methodology. I don't accept that notion. We use statistical methodology. We update the goods that are within the basket. For example, if we look at cars, we are not pricing cars from 2013 when the weights were created within the basket. We are pricing current model cars. And that's what happens throughout many of the sectors. We do replacement throughout those periods, so we do have current items and the items that individuals actually consume. Unless we were to do a HES and the weights come out different, and we will embark on a new HES within the next 6 to 12 months. Unless the weights change, we're not going to get fundamentally different outcomes within our consumer price index. Like I said, we price over 3,000 items. It's very difficult in our economy our size to find 3,000 substitute items that people purchase that they're not purchasing now.
Okay. All right. Another question from Sean. How is the aggregate lower than the United States? How is this possible?
So if we look at the United States, and even if I look at the release that was in the RG today as it pertained to Cayman, their rental sectors are showing significant levels of movement. Our prices in Bermuda for some of our consumer items were already well above the US prices. And so our cost of living has been so high that we don't have much room for those higher movement in prices. Some of our prices are close to what we would consider to be maximum in terms of what consumers are prepared to pay for the items within the basket. And so you can't adequately compare Cayman or the UK or the United States to Bermuda. Our economies are structured different, and the household purchases are also different, which dictates how the weights are derived.
Now, when we're talking about the rental sector, is that mostly made up of units under rent control, or is it a combination of rent control units and those not under rent control?
So it's, when we look at the rental sector, it's both. It's rent control and non-rent control properties.
Okay. So like for the non-rent
And
control,
the non-rent control properties have a heavier weight than the rent control properties. So out of that 26.7% that the rental sector represents in the index, non-rent control properties represent 13.5%.
okay, thank you. Getting back to some of the groups, Age Concern said in their 2021 report that they were giving more and more money out, and the number of money that they've assisted families with has gone from seniors with has gone from like 32,000 about 5 years ago to 90,000 last year, and they're expecting it to top $100,000 this year. How can we do something to help these organizations, these charity groups that are helping the Bermuda public, those people that are hurting and in need?
And so the government is experiencing similar. What we pay for seniors on financial assistance, seniors still are the largest demographic group in our social protection scheme. And so what their experience is similar to what we are experiencing from the government support. What we also have to appreciate is that we have an aging population. So the population of seniors that we would have to support over the next 5 years is going to grow at a very rapid rate. And so charities who support seniors and the government who also supports seniors, we're going to see that there is going to be an increased level of demand.
Okay. You mentioned how our current CPI is based on the United Nations model. Is there any, do you feel like there's any demand or need to implement a newer model?
No, the United Nations methodology is utilized so that countries can compare the data, so the data can be comparative throughout the world. If different countries used different methodologies, and then you can't compare um, whether it be GDP um, or measure retail sales or the consumer price index, balance of payments, all of these things that are based off of like methodology. What I would say is that we do receive technical assistance from CARTAC, and through those technical consultations, we
Okay,
continually make
stop you for a second. What is CARTEC?
the Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance Center.
Okay, thank you.
And through CARTAC, they continuously look at our methodology and they recommend revisions. One of the recommendations was that we move to updating, doing an HES survey, move from 10 years to every 5 years. And that will replenish the weights in a more timely manner than we currently do.
And the next one of those is going to take place when?
Within the next 6 to 12 months.
6 to 12 months. And then that will be reflected the following year, or?
No, it would take us some time to compile the data and then rebase our indexes. And so if you look at the weights in the current consumer price index, the weights derive from 2013, but the index is based April 5th, 2015. And so we'll look at a similar trend where there's a 2-year lag.
Okay, that sounds fair. Okay, well, I think we're going to take a few more questions here. Anna Pereira, how different are the weightings compared to the US and other countries? I think you basically touched on this maybe a little bit with the rent, but overall.
Yeah, I can actually get that data, that comparative data, and put it out there in a future release, um, and have that work be done. But when we looked at this, our rates are significantly different than other economists, and so each economist's rates are based off of their household expenditure, and we don't have the same household expenditure patterns as the United States.
Okay, thank you. Why, again, another question from TJ, why is it calculated on a weighted analysis?
So, like I said, it's a dispersed approach we use. If we want to have an accurate measure of how prices are impacting households, you would have to look at what the majority of households spend their money on. If the majority of households spend their money on rent, then the increase in rent would have a heavier impact than an increase in grapes. And the rates allow you to create that differential between an increase in the price of your rent and an increase in the price of grapes.
Okay, all right. Minister, we want to thank you for your time here tonight, and want to give you a chance to say a last word, maybe something I haven't asked you that you feel is important that you want to get out to the public.
Certainly, there have been commentary in terms of individuals questioning the methodology, but the methodology that we use to compile the consumer price index is sound methodology. Um, I support the Department of Statistics and their data. I also support the workers and the professionals that actually compile our statistics. And so I think what needs to happen, we need to do continual education to educate the public as to how our data is actually compiled, the methodology used, so that individuals have a better understanding. I know that persons look at the news and see things that happen in the US and assume that it should be mirrored in Bermuda, but our economies are not parallel.
And I don't think anybody would want to be experiencing the pain at the pump that the U.S. is happening right now.
Well, I would say we've had pain in the pump for decades.
Yes, ours was always more expensive.
Correct.
Yeah. All right, Minister, just want to thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
And thank you to all our viewers who tuned in. I'm your host, Don Burgess. And from all of Burr News, have a beautiful evening.